Welcome everyone. Welcome to the next in our series of fireside chats. Although we're not by the fireside today, we're in the wonderful world of Zoom, and I'm joined from his office at St Paul's Anglican Grammar School by the senior chaplain there, the Revd Daniel Lowe. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us and for preaching at our pre-recorded Eucharist for the 21st Sunday after Pentecost. And that was a sermon that Daniel preached into an empty church at St Paul's Anglican Church in Warrigal, and we've slotted into our offering from the cathedral this week. So on both counts, Daniel, thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's nice to be able to do this even at a distance.
Absolutely. So you're there in Warrigal and I'm here in Sale, and lo and behold, we're able to have a chat, which is lovely. Daniel, thanks for your sermon, and I've had a sneak preview of that, and it's a wonderful homily, and I really love the idea that you kind of toyed with about this sort of transactional notion of love, that in our society, in our culture, we have a very kind of transactional sense of relationships, and we can make other people into almost commodities by the way we kind of engage in a sort of economy of exchange, even in quite personal and intimate relationships. And yet the divine economy, as our scriptures for this week remind us, is so contrary to that. The divine economy is not an economy of exchange; it's an economy of grace, of gift, and that's so countercultural for us, isn't it? And I wonder, how you think we can bear witness to that divine economy, not only in our daily lives, but in our churches, in our faith communities, and especially perhaps, in your context at a school. What does that look like in your context?
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me as I was thinking about that sermon was just how ingrained that kind of transactional mentality is, that we almost don't even recognise it. It's the water we swim in that sense. So even thinking of examples of a transactional operation of love, I felt like I was thinking up examples and then thinking, well, is that so bad? Like, that's just normal.
Yeah.
That idea of a non-transactional relationship, a love that is given as a gift with nothing expected in return, is so foreign that I think probably the first step for me, particularly in an educational culture that I'm in the school, but probably applies to churches as well, is just to draw attention to the fact that there is a different way, that it's not just a fait accompli that all relationships are transactional and all we can do is get the best for ourselves out of it. So just drawing attention to that and calling it out for what it is a helpful start.
Yeah.
And then in terms of modelling it, it's I just remember a couple of years ago working with some year sevens and talking about, we were just going through the Sermon on the Mount, I think, and we got to talking about the command to love your enemies and forgive. And I just remember this year 7 boy looking at me, baffled, and saying, and he was quite forthright, and he said, but that's just not how the world works. It doesn't work. You can't do that. It doesn't work. And he could not fathom this concept that how could anyone possibly live like that? So I think even when we can show in our imperfect way those little glimpses of it, because it is so countercultural, even just the little imperfect glimpse is significant and means something.
Absolutely. And as you say, the churches are not immune from this. You referred, I think, in your homily to a works-based faith.
Yep.
Salvation by works, and even as Christians, it's so hard to get past that idea that somehow we have to earn God's love or God's approval. We struggle with gifts, don't we? Because we want to reciprocate. We want to, in a sense, deserve the gift,
Yes.
and be able to repay the gift. But that's not how economies of grace work, is it? So it's a real challenge for us at the very, centre of our faith, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that service idea is probably the most obvious kind of starting point often for us to live differently and to show something differently. That there's always an expectation of something in return, and to give service, and that can be the simplest of things in the way we just give of our time to someone else, right through to bigger, more organised institutional service provision. It's that offering of service without any expectation of anything in return that gives that picture of grace and of love given freely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, St Paul's and Gippsland Grammar are both wonderful exemplars of that kind of, service model of learning and leadership too, as part of the curriculum. I was amused just before we came online together. I was reading a little piece about the public holiday, the grand final public holiday, which apparently has been rebadged as a Thanksgiving public holiday.
I believe so.
And there was a little article about why being thankful is good for us, which is kind of counterintuitive, because again, there's that kind of self-interest in there that we're supposed to get something out of being
Yes.
thankful rather than just being thankful, because that's a good thing to do in and of itself. So it just shows how deeply entrenched that kind of transactional thinking is. As you said, it's like the water we swim in or the air we breathe. We're not even aware of it so much of the time. But there we are. Daniel, you've been at St Paul's for almost 20 years, I think, in one capacity or another, and for about 10 of those, or a bit over 10 of those, as senior chaplain. That's a great stretch of ministry in various capacities, and just be lovely if you could share with us a little bit about the life of a school chaplain. Some people will be somewhat familiar with that. For others, it'll be quite new. And tell us a little bit about what your day, your week looks like, and what the kind of real core business for you is as a school chaplain.
Yeah, sure. And it is a varied role, and in fact looks different across different schools too. So I can describe what my kind of daily routine is like, and there are some commonalities, but other chaplains would operate very differently in their setting. But I guess you can divide the chaplain's role for me into two key parts. Part of it is educational. I'm a classroom teacher, and I teach Christian studies, which is a compulsory subject for us through to year 11. So about half of my time is spent in the classroom or preparing to be in the classroom and teaching curriculum. And that's a very specific type of engagement. Part of the reason I like that as a chaplain, not only for the fact that I get to engage in the classroom with kids in that more intense way, and to be able to teach Christian studies, to sort of explore the Bible and broader issues related to that. But it also means that I have some credibility with kids and staff, because the kids, they understand a teacher, they know why I'm there, so they can kind of put me in a box in some way. Oh yeah, that's Mr. Lowe, he teaches Christian studies. He's also the chaplain, and they might be a bit vague about what that means. And the same for staff, that I'm going through the same seasonal ups and downs that they are, the pressures of report writing or whatever it happens to be at the time. So I kind of have some credibility.
In their shoes, haven't you? You walked in their shoes, so they, there's the kind of respect and sense of solidarity that goes with that.
Yeah, that's right. So that's half of the role, and the other half is a much more diverse role, because it's the kind of combination of pastoral and leadership. And so on the pastoral side of things, the chaplain in a lot of schools, and it's no different here, is part of a broader pastoral team. So I'm not really working by myself in that. We have counsellors, we have staff in particular positions of responsibility that have a pastoral oversight. And so that can be not so much kids dropping in. It's not that kids coming to me seeking pastoral advice. That's does happen, but it's more being present and around with the kids, and looking for those opportunities, spotting those kids that are isolated, catching up with kids that you happen to know there's things going on in their lives, and just being aware of and available to those kids, but also directing them to appropriate support, and working with the team to be a bit proactive too, and to put things in place, sort of tracking our pastoral program, making sure we're covering relevant topics in their pastoral time. But as part of that also, I have a role in running chapels and contributing to assemblies. So I do have some formal occasions where I gather the body together. And that St Paul's culture is a fairly informal one. We don't do pomp and ceremony all that much, and so the chapels tend to reflect that culturally. That's been the history of the school. Our chapels are fairly informal, but they are times when we have an opportunity to gather together to worship through song and to pray together, and to unpack the Bible in a slightly different way to what we would in a classroom. It's always an interesting dynamic, because while it is a chapel service, I'm always conscious that the kids gathered there reflect a whole range of beliefs and worldviews, and you can't make any assumptions on that. So it's always framed in terms of an opportunity to engage in a way that's appropriate to you, and that changes how we do things. The singing has been an interesting one. It goes through cycles of being fairly unenthusiastic and uninspired, and I lament the lack of lusty singing that goes on, through to then other seasons where singing is a great unifying sort of moment, and we generally sing contemporary worship songs. The kids seem to respond to those, although the odd old hymn sneaks its way in.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, I certainly heard some examples of that at some of the bigger assemblies that I've been to at St Paul's. It's quite inspiring, actually, when the whole gang gets together and rips into one of those contemporary songs. It can be very powerful.
Yeah. And what's been interesting actually this year is that one of the things the kids have missed the most, that they've reflected back, is singing in chapel.
Yeah.
Which for some surprised me, because they don't necessarily show their enthusiasm at the time, but they've lamented that loss.
That's kind of nice, isn't it, to know that they missed that?
It is encouraging to know that that's something that they have identified as a valuable thing that they miss.
Yeah.
So my time spent with chapels, and I put a fair bit of creative energy into those chapels across different year levels. And then a little bit of my time also is spent in leadership. I'm on the school executive, and so I contribute as I've been described in various times as my role as being the moral compass, or having just the spiritual oversight or the spiritual eye. I sometimes feel like a little bit of a fraud, I guess, on executive, because my brief is not very operational, and often the other members of the exec will come with fairly heavy operational agendas, and I don't bring that particular role. I have a different role, but I've grown into that and really enjoy that.
And it's great to have that other perspective around the table, I think, and the chaplain, the senior chaplain, is part of the leadership group of the school. I think that's a fantastic symbol, especially for an Anglican school and organisation.
Yeah.
Daniel, you mentioned that just before we started, there was the familiar din of the kids finishing recess, and how welcome that kind of noise was to your ears. What's it been like during COVID? I mean, in a school setting. I mean, you're a dad as well as a teacher and a chaplain, homeschooling, trying to run classes online, trying to keep people together, trying to get the year 12s through. Tell us what that experience has been like from your perspective.
Yeah, so as always, it's a bit of a diverse experience. There have been some real challenges, but there's been some surprising joys along the way. I think that the younger the kids that you're dealing with, either as a parent or as a teacher, the more challenging it's been. But there's been some kids that have actually surprised us and thrived academically because they find the social pressure of being at school quite difficult, whereas other kids have really struggled with the lack of social engagement. So, I mean, I was quite pleased just as a parent watching my two boys sorry, the phone's ringing.
That's okay. I just had a message pop up too, so
we can edit that out. I can't silence my office phone, unfortunately. Yeah, so as a parent, watching my boys tackle homeschooling, and so my older one's in year 9, and he's very engaged online with his mates, just as the normal state of affairs, and they did well because they had the means to stay connected socially. That although even they missed the in-person contact eventually, but there was a lot of endless conversation going on while they were doing their schooling. Whereas my younger one in year 5, he's a social creature anyway, and that age group just don't have the same access to. They often don't have their own device and access to social media, or hopefully they don't. So that limited his opportunity, and he really struggled socially. Academically, he was fine, but the social thing was missing there. And as teachers, we found the same, that you could change your curriculum, deliver it in an online format, and a lot of things. It was pretty hard work to change your thinking, but we could do that. But what we missed was that personal engagement with kids. And the longer it wore on, the harder it got to engage kids online. We'd joke about the kids not turning their cameras on, which there's all sorts of reasons why that might be. But teaching to a class of initials on a screen is fairly soul-sapping at times.
It's hard to read the body language, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah,
it's hard enough anyway on Zoom, but
yeah. So there was certainly that challenge of that fundamental human engagement was missing, that everyone felt the lack of.
And as you say, the fatigue kind of sets in, doesn't it? The cumulative.
Yeah. And they talk about Zoom fatigue now and those things, and it was a different sort of tiring. So it was, it's been a challenging time, and even now the grief of the year 12s not getting to do all of their usual end of year celebrations and trying to work out how to do that differently with them. I really, really feel for them. That they feel they've been robbed of something. And there's not much you can do other than to acknowledge that, yes, that's what's happened.
Because those things are a real rite of passage, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so. And they in every school there's traditions that build up over the years that sort of it's their turn to do, to be a part of whatever the traditional farewell is, and it's just most of them just not possible. So it's certainly been a tough time as a school, and the concern more and more is I think for the health and well-being of kids, not so much. I think the academic loss will be caught up. I know there's different schools of thought on that, but I would be more concerned about what the lack of social engagement and the isolation and the different pressures, along with just that extra burden of anxiety that we're all living with, is the impact that's having on kids. And so more and more, I think this, as a school, we have to focus on student well-being, and that would be something we would say we were strong on anyway. And I think most schools are pretty on the ball with well-being, but it's just become such a pressing issue that we have to invest a lot in it, because we are concerned for kids. Yeah,
I heard COVID described as a sort of amplifier. So whatever the baseline is, be it anxiety or whatever, it's kind of exacerbated, in the crucible.
Which is exactly what I think we've seen. Those kids that were already a bit anxious or struggling were even more so, and kids that would normally be fine suddenly were coming unstuck at little obstacles that would they normally take in their stride. And the same with staff too.
Yeah,
Second experience.
Yeah, I think the schools
Staff.
are doing an amazing job. From what I've been able to see, and our two diocesan schools in particular have just done an outstanding job of looking after people and delivering a tremendous educational service in the midst of enormous challenges. So, well done to you and the team in the way you've kind of navigated that space. Yeah. And as you know, Daniel, we're engaged in the diocese in some vision renewal work, and some of the early kind of fruits of that and things we've heard from the discussions that we've had so far. One of the big themes that's emerging is the awareness of a relative absence of younger people in our demographic in terms of our worshipping communities, not in our communities or the wider activities of the church, perhaps, but certainly in the kind of core, worshipping community, and indeed in positions of leadership and ministry, within our structures too. So a lot of people, I think, are really curious about kind of where young people are at and what the kind of hallmarks of spirituality are for our younger people and how they relate, if they do at all, to more sort of organised, religion and the institutional church. Even those who would think of themselves culturally as Anglican, as many of your students and families at St Paul's would. Have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating space because I think no one's quite sure what is emerging with young people, and they're quite diverse in the way that they engage with spirituality and with the church. I would say that less and less that cultural identification is a feature. There would be far fewer parents now who would identify simply culturally as an Anglican, or probably the Catholic Church has held on to that cultural affiliation a bit more strongly, but even for them, I think it's waning. So when you're talking about kids identifying culturally, it's another step removed again, and they really wouldn't think about that at all. And the fact that they go to an Anglican school doesn't really mean much. The Anglican bit of it doesn't really sort of mean a lot, other than being part of the title. In that sense, in a sort of connecting to something bigger.
Organisation, yeah.
But in terms of spirituality, there's certainly plenty that would. I think the majority don't think about it a lot in overt language. I think that that's not to say that kids don't think spiritually, but I think they largely lack a language to explore spirituality, and so it's not a part of what they would often talk about. And that makes it interesting to try and figure out where they're at. There are kids that there's the full spectrum. We would have kids that have adopted wholeheartedly the kind of rampant atheist, the new atheist kind of antagonism towards any sort of spirituality and faith, right through to kids that have grown up with a very real and alive faith that's been nurtured through childhood and that they've retained and taken on for themselves, and everything in the middle. So that there's still that diversity there. There's probably the lack of trust, and a lot of social commentators talk about this, and I see it sort of firsthand, that growing lack of trust that we have in institutions generally carries over to young people's perceptions of the organised church. But they would distinguish that they don't necessarily make those connections between. They might have very little time for a large organised church as they see it, but would then talk about either people they know or experiences they've had personally that they completely disassociate from being part of the organised church, despite the fact that that's probably exactly where they came from. So they have an interesting kind of filter that they view things through.
My sense is that it's a bit more organic somehow. that don't tend to think in silos or compartments. This is the spiritual part of my life, or whatever. It's all kind of beautifully sort of thrown together, and it's a kind of just very, as you say, very experience based.
Yes.
Kind of lens. Yeah.
Yeah. There's experience based and relationally too. It will depend on who is in that. That we've always done that, but the authorities in their life are the people that they relate well to, not the people that carry a weight of authority, a more societal way. It's the people that they feel a sense of trust and bond with.
In their lives and in their circles. I think that's a really key point, Daniel. Is that kind of part of the message for us to really work very, very hard on that relational aspect of our connection with young people, and to come out of our traditional spaces perhaps, and just very much one-on-one in those kind of small circles to really try and build those relationships with younger people, and to get to know them, and to give them a chance to get to know us, and to have that very conversational kind of dialogical approach, rather than an expectation that there's going to be some automatic connection with a structure or a tradition.
Yeah, very, very much so, though. And alongside that, I think some of the old models of youth groups and ways of engaging with young people in the church are going to struggle, because we can't compete with the sorts of events that they get to, well, in the normal course of life, events they get to be a part of. The church we're not in the business of putting on grand entertainment and events, and so we can't compete with that. Yeah. But we can compete in terms of what we bring to relationships, and that, I think that's where young people will engage and connect, and so that's probably the place that the church should focus on, that we can actually bring a richness of relationship, which is hard, because I mean it's not necessarily good news for everyone, because it's such a slow, hard grind to build relationships, to work one-on-one. You're not going to suddenly have an influx of young people filling the halls and filling the pews or anything. It's going to happen very slowly, and there is a point at which I think critical mass starts to play, and your peers will attract each other. But if we just rely on that, I don't think it's ever going to happen. But I think building those meaningful relationships, and there has to be a point of connection. So finding a reason to have a point of connection with a young person is probably the key. And there's all sorts of ways that could happen. I think about we're very fortunate at our church to have a lot of musicians, a very strong music ministry. And there are a number of people that have been able to build bridges and relationships with some of the younger people just through music and through their shared love of music. And that it's a legitimate reason to have a conversation, to build a relationship there. And so it doesn't have to be through music, of course. There's all sorts of ways of doing it. But I think relationally, that's going to be the key.
And it kind of gets back to some of the things that you're teasing out in your sermon too, I think, about the quality of those relationships. And you've written really helpfully about this over the years, Daniel, in the Gippsland Anglican, and we've missed your little segment in recent times, because of course you've been on a wonderful period of long service leave, well earned and much needed, I'm sure. Although I'm also quite sure that the COVID event has sort of thrown a spanner in the works of your long service leave plans. Tell us a little bit about that time, and what were the kind of pillars perhaps that you built it around, and why you think long service leave is such a kind of gift to those of us in ministry who can, at some point, along the journey, take a significant break and refresh, for the next chapter.
Yeah, sure. So my long service leave kind of feels like it had two parts to it. There was the pre-COVID part to it, and then there was long service leave in the midst of COVID.
Yeah.
It was I deliberately took a long break, and I had a couple of sort of reasons for that. I could sense in myself that I was the batteries were running low, and I needed to just recharge emotionally, physically, spiritually. Everything was fine, but needed a proper top up. So part of the reason for the break was to just have that rest and recreation, and a lot of that was built around. We were very fortunate to be able to travel just before all sort of global travel ceased. So the family travelled around the UK for the first part of it, and that was all about just enjoying the travel and the adventure and rest and recreation. And that was a wonderful time. That was really, it's special to be able to travel with your kids and to share that experience. I've got family over there, so we caught up and had Christmas with my sister, which was lovely. I finally got to visit Ireland, which I had always wanted to, and absolutely loved. Couldn't tell you why, but there's just something magical about it that it really appealed to me. So there was those sorts of experiences that were great. So I came back from that, and that was over the kind of summer period. Came back from that feeling very rested and refreshed, but that set me up for the other part of the long service leave plan, was to be able to step outside of the kind of busy routine of school ministry and to think a bit bigger. And so I'd lined up, I had these great plans to visit a whole lot of different schools and spend time with their chaplains and just get a sense of what other people are doing and how they're doing it. That all fell in a crashing heap, and in the end just didn't happen because of COVID. I got a few visits in beforehand, and there was a lot of sanitising of hands going on during those visits. Little did I know that was going to become the norm. But even those few visits were helpful for me, just to have that freedom to see what other people do and how they manage it. And people were very generous in sharing with me, letting me observe and then talking to me about their time. And it helped me to get a good perspective on what I was doing, and to recognise the things that maybe I'd got a little bit too hung up on that weren't that important, and to remind me of some things that were really valuable, and to see it through the eyes of someone else. The other blessing that I had during long service leave was that I was able to continue, was that I committed to spending time regularly with my own dad, and just to document some of his life story. And so we were able to do that, initially meeting in person, and then when that became, because he's in Melbourne, when that became unwise to be meeting together, we continued via Zoom. And that was a really special time. We've always had a good relationship, but to have that committed time where we sat down and would go through different parts of his life and just to chat about that.
How precious.
Yeah, that was a great experience. But the combination of all of those things was very, very refreshing, and kind of I could feel the difference in how I was relating to people before and after the long service leave. It really did allow me a proper recharge. Whereas I think when we take a normal holiday break and we get a week away or 2 weeks or whatever, it's enough to keep us going. But it's really a rest for the purposes of keeping us working. It doesn't really bring much more than that. Whereas a long break with some intentional things put into it really gave me more than just a boost to keep going, but actually gave me a fresh start. And the intention was, as you said, I've been at the school a long time. I don't feel any strong call to leave the school. I feel, I feel quite settled here, and I think God's not booting me out yet. Still has work. So to do that long haul, I needed to be refreshed. I couldn't just keep going over and doing the same sorts of things. I needed that break. So partly it was a strategic break to ensure that I could still carry on for the long haul in one place. And there's a real
kind of thing,
Yeah, it's hard to define exactly why it was such a good time. And even, I say that even when a large part of the second half of my time was spent at home with the boys. And I mean, I should say that one of the things I was most looking forward to in that time was space to myself. I'm very much the introvert and don't get a lot of time by myself just because of the nature of life.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the gifts that I missed out on, because instead of having the house to myself for days on end, I was kicked out of my own house because I was disrupting the boys doing their homework and doing their schoolwork. So it was very different. But even with all of that, it was still a very restful time, and allowed me to come back into school and to come back in such a sort of tumultuous time as well.
Yeah.
It was nice to feel like I was ready for it. I was prepared and had the resilience and I'd been restored sufficiently to do that, to cope.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would, having now taken long service leave twice, and this one being a longer stint, I would highly recommend it, and also there was real benefit in planning out. I was quite keen not to just take leave and see what happened, or not really know. I know my own personality. I knew I would waste it if I didn't have a plan. And so having that planning for rest and recreation, but also planning for some challenging of my thinking and some exploring was really helpful. And I definitely want to. Yeah, we're very lucky to have long service leave, so you want to make the most of it if you can take it.
Yeah, no, that's a salutary tale. Thank you, and a great encouragement to others of us to use that time wisely and for its the purpose for which it's there. Daniel, we better let you go in a minute, but just perhaps a word about what sort of drew you into a chaplaincy path, and what you'd say to others who might be thinking vocationally about the ministry of chaplaincy, whether it's school chaplaincy or some other form of chaplaincy. How would you encourage others to kind of explore that sense of vocation, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I've often said that I think I'm a bit slow on the uptake and a little bit daft when it comes to figuring out where God wants me when, because I ended up in school chaplaincy quite by accident, or for want of a better word. I enjoy working with young people, so that's kind of your first hint of you. If there are a group of people that you enjoy or have a heart for, that's probably an indication that there might be a ministry for you there somewhere. If you can't stand young people, you're probably not going to be a school chaplain. That seems fairly obvious. But said that, I really didn't think that I would find myself back in a school setting. That was, if you'd told me that that's where I would end up, I would have laughed. I was pursuing parish ministry in terms of youth ministry, and was thinking, well, I like working with young people. I guess the obvious pathway might end up being parish ministry, but even ordination was not on my agenda. And it was really just through a series of the right people nudging me, the right occasions coming up, and God kind of using all of those to gently shepherd me into the role, was where I ended up. So I suppose being open to that, being open to that, never. One of my dad's words of advice to me from his own experience was never tell God there's something you won't do, because you'll probably end up doing that. God will have his way with you, and it's a bit like that. I think that I was prepared to explore those opportunities, and people were prepared to take a risk with me. And everything I've gone into, I went into teaching and working in a school before I had any teaching qualifications, so I had to kind of do that on the run. I feel like my ministry training is constantly on the run.
Yeah, too right.
And that hasn't changed. The longer I'm in ministry, the more I feel like I've got more to learn. So yeah, for me it was. I mean, there are a number of key people I would look back and thank for nudging me and for asking me to consider that sort of role. But it wasn't a neat plan. It was certainly a zigzagging journey to get here.
as it so often is, and
yeah,
you rightly say we learn on the job, don't we? Constantly
yeah.
learning
So
this bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
So for others that are considering different sorts of ministry, there are so many different ways that you can serve and that you can minister. That I wasn't even aware of half the possibilities when I was thinking about it. So uh, just allowing yourself to be stretched a little bit and recognizing where your own passions are, and God will probably use those
Mm. Yeah,
and that'll direct you in some way, I think.
fantastic. Well, Daniel, we're really grateful for your ministry, very fruitful and faithful ministry. Our Anglican schools are such an important part of the life and work of our diocese and family, and such an important part of our share in God's mission to the world in Christ. And you're very much a part of that, working, of course, with Dean there these days, Dean Spalding, and other colleagues on the team you referred to. So be assured of our prayers for St Paul's Anglican Grammar School and for your ministry there, and for all the young people and the staff that you're helping to care for. It's a real privilege, isn't it? And you've given a great account of that to us today. So it's been lovely to chat with you, and
Likewise.
I'm sure everyone will enjoy hearing you break open the word as well in the context of our pre-recorded service. So thanks again for your time and your ministry to us all this week, Daniel.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Every blessing.
Great.
Bye for now.